Also, I feel like I'm like trying to talk quiet right now because I know that both my roommates are home, and why is it so embarrassing to make videos? The glasses are not real. I just like the way they look. They're literally blue light, so just an FYI. Today's video, as you can tell by the title, I read a book that was set in my hometown, and we are talking about No Hiding in Boise by Kim Hooper. I bought the book, and here's how it went. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Hadley. I grew up in the Boise area, and so this book immediately caught my eye. I was walking around at Barnes & Noble, and I was in the fiction section, and it was one of the ones that was face out. And then I saw the word Boise, and it immediately caught my attention. And then I read the back cover, and it reminded me of a book that I thought I had the potential to give 5 stars. The tags on it are fiction, literary fiction, women's fiction, and psychological thriller. All of those combined really sounded like something that I would love. And then I also was very curious to see how somebody who I read the author bio, this author lives in Southern California. So that piqued my interest even more because I was like, okay, she doesn't even live in Boise. How is she going to accurately portray a story in this setting? Okay, I have a little notebook here where I wrote down all of my thoughts sort of as I was reading and then after I was reading so that I could give the most comprehensive review. This is like the first single book review on my channel. So I'm super excited to get into this. I will give you my rating, all the thoughts as we go along, but I wanted to start by giving an overview of the book. So this is a multi-POV book, which I always love. I love switching point of views every single chapter. I think it makes a book way more fast-paced, and that definitely held true because I flew through this book. So we're centering around 3 main characters, and they're all women. We have one older woman, Joyce, and she is the mother of a boy named Jed. And Jed was the shooter at a shooting at a bar in Boise. So that is sort of what the entire plot of this book is centered around, is this shooting at a bar called Ray's. I don't know if Ray's is a real bar in Boise. I've never been to it if it exists, but this woman's son, Jed, basically went crazy one night and killed several people in this bar shooting and injured a couple of others. So that is how Joyce is connected. Our middle-aged POV woman, her name is Angie, and her husband, Cale, was shot in the head in this shooting, and he is now in a coma in the hospital. He was shot in the head, and to me, I was like, okay, you immediately die if you're shot in the head, but apparently, depending on where the bullet goes in your brain, there's science behind it that she explains in the book, you can actually just slip into a coma. So that's what happened to Cale. And then our third girl, her name is Tessa, and she is, I believe, 23, so she's kind of younger. She's our youngest POV, and she is a bartender at Ray's Bar who survived the shooting. She hid in a closet during it, and then Jed, the shooter, ended up shooting himself as well. And so after that happens, Tessa is safe and the police find her. So all of these women are tied together by this absolute tragedy, and it's actually it's difficult to talk about, and I'm wondering what YouTube actually allows you to say. But the entire book is about the aftermath of the shooting, and then there are a couple other POVs that we get in here. We get a bunch of the victims' POVs, and those, don't even get me started on those chapters. Those were the most heartbreaking chapters you've ever read because they gave us some background on the people who were shot and killed in the shooting, and you get to learn about their lives and the people that they left behind. Somebody has a baby on the way. Like, it is so heartbreaking, but I also understand why they were included because it makes the whole premise of the shooting, it makes it have a lot more depth, and it makes you realize how tragic it is that people actually passed away. As you can tell, it's very character driven because the main event in the plot has already happened. You know, the incident already happened. Now we're following the characters in the aftermath. So there is a little bit of mystery here. I can understand why it could be categorized in there. We mostly have a mystery of why was Angie's husband, Cale, the one who's now in the coma, why was he at Ray's Bar at like midnight? And Angie, at the beginning of the book, I believe the first chapter is from Angie's POV. Yeah, it is. The Boise Police Department calls her and they're like, we're so sorry, your husband has been shot, he's in the hospital. And she's like, what? He's next to me in bed. And then she looks over and he's not there. So that's very confusing. She immediately is like, oh my goodness, is he cheating on me? So there's a bit of a mystery there. And there's also the mystery of why would Jed do this in the first place? Joyce, his mother, that we get the POV of, she is absolutely shocked by this news. And she continually tells the police, he wasn't a violent person. I never thought he would do something like this. So there are those mystery elements. There's not a whole ton of romance. Tessa has a relationship that we follow a little bit, but it's all completely open door. There is absolutely no spicy scenes. I'm trying to remember if there was even any kissing scenes. So basically no romance, but we are parsing through relationships. Relationships are obviously a central foundation of the story, just not romantic ones necessarily. Moving on to the next section I wrote in my notes, which was main synopsis points of how I felt as I was reading this book. First, we'll start with Angie. Her chapters honestly were just frustrating. And you'll see what I mean if you read this book. And I remember doing a Goodreads update when I was like 200 pages into this book. And I remember writing in the update, all the men in this book suck besides the ones who die. And that was making me upset. And it just continued to ring true throughout Angie's chapters because we get a lot of history of she and Cale, and they have a daughter named Evie. And we are sort of in the present day with Angie, obviously, as she's going to the hospital and sitting with Cale as he's in a coma and trying to solo parent their daughter. I believe she's between 3 and 5. She's a young child still. So we get some of that, but we also get so much backstory on she and Cale's relationship. And the entire time I was honestly so frustrated with Cale because he was just not treating her well. And thank goodness it all makes sense by the end. This is a full spoilers review, by the way, so click off now if you would like to read. But I was so frustrated by the way that Cale was treating Angie. He was so distant. He was an absent father. He didn't play with their child. He didn't want to help take care of her. So I was mostly just frustrated by Angie's chapters. Moving on to Joyce's POV, hers were so sad. I mean, she is reeling from the loss of her son because he ultimately ended his own life and a bunch of others. She's reeling from that. She's also trying to make up for his mistakes the entire story. She is going around, trying to apologize and take credit for what he did, even though it wasn't her fault, but she feels very guilty as a mother for somehow failing her son because he did something like this. So her chapters were sad, but I also think that the grief and what she's going through was really artfully done, and definitely props to the author on this, just because that's such an interesting POV to write from, like the mother of a shooter. And she even calls herself that at one point. Joyce is like, this is my identity now, this is who I am, and I have to accept that. And so I think that would be a really challenging POV to do as artfully as she did. So I do think Joyce's chapters were really well written. And then Tessa, what I want to mention is that all of the chapters did have distinctive voices. Like when you're reading Joyce's chapters, you're like, oh yeah, this woman is, in her 60s, almost 70s maybe. And then when you're reading Tessa's chapters, you're like, she is 23. So I will say all of the chapters felt and read very differently depending on which point of view it was, which I really liked, and it definitely kept it very fast paced. I liked Tessa's story. I was also very curious until it comes out at the end what her relationship is with Cale. I was like, what is this mystery romance? Like, she's a bartender, but she has a boyfriend. What is she doing with Angie's husband? Like, what is happening? So that mystery part was very good. We get one chapter of Jed where we get to read part of his journal where he sort of describes what he's going through. We learn how depressed he was and how just angry at the world he was, not necessarily angry at other people, but angry at the world. And I think that's also very interesting. Last main synopsis point on this book is that the last 3 chapters felt like a cop-out to me because all 3 of the characters are being asked to be in a documentary being made about the Ray's Bar shooting and the aftermath of everything and the relationships of all the people, all the victims' families. So they're all being interviewed for a documentary. I thought that there could have been maybe a cooler way to have all of these characters reconnect again. It definitely worked. We got to see all 3 of the main POV characters again. and we got to see where their lives are headed now a little bit after the shooting, which is good, and it ties everything up really nicely. I just think there was a more creative way than making it a documentary, if that makes sense. Moving on to my main gripes with this book, and the reason that I'm giving it 3.5 stars. First, and the most obvious one, is that I was obviously judging this so harshly because I know Boise and can speak on it and lived there for literally 20 years. And so I was looking at this book through the lens of a native from this place, making sure it was being done justice. And there were a couple inaccuracies that I found. She was mentioning things like the Cheesecake Factory at the mall and the two hospitals like St. Al's and St. Alphonsus or St. Luke's and St. Al's. And she's mentioning things that I know do exist and things that were accurate. At one point she says that it is a 5-hour drive from Boise to Moscow. And Moscow is where the University of Idaho is, up in northern Idaho. And I just want to know how fast Kim Hooper is driving, because that is not a 5-hour drive. Like, I'm trying to make it work in my brain. I'm like, okay, in the middle of the night, no traffic, like maybe, and if you're speeding, but no, that is definitely closer to a 6 or even a 6.5 hour drive. So that was one thing that stopped me dead in my tracks as I was reading. I was like, girl, how fast are you driving? Okay, my second major gripe, and I'm biased again, so maybe this entire video is a moot point and I'm just completely biased in general towards this because I'm also a journalist, but the reporter representation in this book was foul. She made them out to be absolute monstrosities, lawn tramplers. There are multiple scenes where reporters are sticking a camera in Joyce's face and sticking a microphone in her face, trying to get her to comment on what her son did. They are trampling over her lawn. It actually says at one point that they are on her grass, trampling her house. Her garage gets vandalized. As a journalist, I just need to say, never in my life have I ever been given the personal address of a victim of a tragedy. She said there was like 10 news vans at her house. This is Boise, Idaho. There's 3 TV stations in Boise. There truly would not have been 10 vans. I really don't think it's that. I just don't think it's big enough for that. She just made them out to be horrible people with no feelings, emotions, human decency, because as a journalist now, I would never in a million years be going, oh yes, this horrible thing that happened at a public bar. Let's talk to the killer's mom. That's who we want to hear from right now. She is reeling from this loss. It's not her fault. She doesn't need to be put on blast in the media. And I would like to have faith in my Boise fellow journalists over there that they would never do that. So I was really upset with how throughout the entire book, reporters were represented as the enemy and these horrible people who all they want is a comment. They just want to stick a camera in your face. And I just want to make it clear that that is absolutely not what we do. And I have never in my life heard of going to a victim's family member's home and waiting outside her home. That's what happens early on in the book. She gets home and she describes 10 news vans waiting for her at her home. I just really don't think there's a world in which the police would release her address so that journalists could go there to talk to her. I don't think they would do that to her. The whole thing really rubbed me the wrong way, but I need to get off my soapbox about that because I could go on for quite some time about the journalist representation. I just think that was probably the least accurate part of the book. Other than that, I think Boise was represented fine. There might have been little things that weren't exactly spot on to what locals would say. The next point that I have written down is Gary wasn't good enough. And you know what? We'll move into this point more a little bit later as well about how realistic this story was. But Gary is Joyce's kind of love interest. They're broken up at the beginning of the book. And keep in mind, Joyce also lost her husband, Ed, several years ago. So she is a widow. And now she's lost her son, and so she's completely alone. I understand that she's reaching out to whoever she can. She dated Gary for a little bit, is what it sounds like, and then they kind of broke up, and then Gary re-enters the picture because she truly has no one else. And the entire time she was describing Gary, I was like, he is the most underwhelming old man. Like, I'm sorry. He's probably an older gentleman who has no patience left and frankly no zest for life. He just was so underwhelming, and I wanted more for Joyce. The next point along that same line, the other love interest, Tessa's love interest, Ryan, I wrote justice for Ryan, because Ryan did nothing wrong. He honestly seemed like a great guy, and then Tessa breaks up with him anyways, because she is just going through so much trauma, so much tragedy after she was involved in the shooting. And I understand how that would be really hard to go through. What I don't understand is why she would leave such a good man during it. So justice for Ryan. My last comment on the third man in this book, who wasn't one of the victims, which I won't go into all of the victims, but there were several male victims, and they were all cooler and better main male characters than our actual three ones who are living. So I'm just gonna put that out there. They were all fantastic. I loved all of the victims. But with Cale, he ends up losing his memory in the coma. When he wakes up, he doesn't remember a whole lot. And I also felt like that was a bit of a cop-out, but probably pretty realistic. So I understood why that was accurate. It also felt like almost the perfect excuse for giving Cale and Angie a fresh start, because they really, really desperately needed one. So, of course, it's a horrible thing to be shot and then be in the hospital in a coma. But for them as a couple, it felt like a blessing in disguise, because it gave them a complete refresh, and he's going to be a better father, and he's a more honest person now. Because it comes out near the very end of the book that the reason Cale was at that bar in the middle of the night was because his daughter is Tessa. He has another daughter, and he never told Angie about her. So Angie finds information on Cale's phone while he's in the coma about Tessa, and she's like, is he cheating on me with this super young girl? She's like half his age. That's weird. Nope, that's just his long lost daughter. And he left Tessa and her mother when he was very young. He basically up and left and was like, I can't do this. I'm not fit out to be a father. And he runs away. And then many years later, he's already in his 30s by the time he meets Angie. And so he's sort of trying to get a relationship with Tessa again. And then that's when the shooting happened at that bar. So we get one Cale chapter. And my only point with this was that I just wish we had a little bit more. And I understand, I mean, he's in a coma for most of this book, so he can't really talk. But I wanted more Cale chapters. I wanted him to feel like a more fully fleshed out character. So, wrapping up the thoughts as well as my positive thoughts on this book, I think that the consequences of a shooting were really, really well done in this book. I mean, that is the whole plot, but I feel like she really went into every possible scenario. Each of the victims came from a completely different place. We have retired men, we have young men with babies on the way, and that really gives people a holistic view of what can happen when a tragedy like that happens and people pass away. Each of them has a story, each of them has something that they're dealing with and something that they left behind. So that was really beautiful. I think it was really well done. I think overall the novel was a really good idea. It has good POVs. And I also liked the lost daughter trope. Tessa not having an affair with Cale, but being his lost daughter was a very happy and welcome surprise at the end. I was like, okay, good, because if Cale was just cheating on her with Tessa at the bar, I'm just gonna lose it, because then the whole point of this is just so dumb, because you spend the whole book pretty much hating Cale for being such an awful husband, and if he was cheating too, it would have just been like, okay, what's the point? Why do we care that he's in a coma? Like, what's going on? So I think that storyline was also really good to sort of thread through there. My last positive here is it felt very realistic. And the whole thing about him losing his memory, I think that was probably realistic. I think for Joyce almost, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, for her to almost settle after Ed, because Gary is an underwhelming man and he is a source of support for her during this whole thing, but he didn't ever like Jed. And he's sort of having this very logical brain side of things while Joyce is going through this incredibly emotional loss. So he balances her out really well during this. I think it's almost realistic in old age that Joyce is almost settling on Gary, because nobody will ever be Ed. She sort of seems to come to accept the fact that she's never going to have another Ed. Nothing will ever be like that love for her. But it's kind of like, guys, what else are we gonna do? We're two old farts and we both need some companionship. So they get together. That sort of felt very realistic to me as well. So even though I wanted more for Joyce, I was still sort of rooting for she and Gary because it sort of felt like what was supposed to happen, or almost what would happen in real life. I also think at 23 years old, it's very realistic that Tessa and Ryan didn't stay together. They hadn't been together for a super long time from what I can remember. And it sort of makes sense that she goes through this thing and she is super mentally damaged by it. And it's very, very sad actually to watch her go through so many of these chapters where she's super jumpy. She doesn't want to leave the house, and she can't sit in restaurants normally anymore unless she can see the door and see what's happening. And those things all felt very realistic. Tessa's response. I'll just say that overall, all of the characters' responses to the shooting felt extremely realistic. And it makes me wonder what kind of research Kim Hooper did or what she's been through. I hope she's okay, because it did feel just so spot on. Like, this is how these people would feel. This is how traumatized they would be. The last thing I wanted to mention was when all three of our characters meet, that was so satisfying. I was like, yes, all three paths are finally crossing. They all meet in Cale's, I almost said hotel room, in his hospital room, and we see how all of their POVs are kind of converging and how they're all tied together by this tragedy. And then in the couple months later, the ending chapters where they're doing the documentary, you hear that they're all still friends. They all are sort of connected by this. And I think that storyline and that theme of togetherness and trauma bonding and finding new friends and family because you all went through something together, I think that was also really beautiful. So I'm really happy that while these storylines started completely separate, I'm happy that they all converged and ended up together, and I felt like that made the ending a lot more satisfying. That said, this is a 3.5 star read for me. I think mostly what dragged it down for me, I mean, I don't love sad books, and this was a pretty sad book. Obviously, it's centered around a shooting. I wanted a little bit more mystery thriller in there. It started to feel very purely fiction. After going over it and seeing obviously how much research, effort, and emotion this author poured into this book, especially to make it as accurate as it is to what I believe would be the accurate and realistic responses to a shooting, I think it deserves 3.5 stars. I absolutely flew through this book, and I really ended up enjoying my time with it, and it was very fun to read a book set in my hometown because Idaho doesn't get a whole lot of love. We do have a pretty cute capital city, and I do love Boise, and I think it was a good choice of setting for this book. I also think it could have happened literally anywhere else. A shooting in a bar, unfortunately, can sort of happen anywhere. So it's interesting to me that she did choose Boise for this. Overall, 3.5 stars. Sorry, the lighting is getting so dark in here because the sun just went behind a cloud, which means it's time for me to wrap this up, and I've been yapping about this book for way too long. But I would recommend this to somebody who likes a bit of a tragic literary fiction with some deep emotions in there, some heavy themes, definitely some trigger warnings. Thank you so much for watching this book review video. I need to wrap it up because I just know this lighting is atrocious and I just look like a ghost now. But let me know if you guys liked this video, and thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!